Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. Well, welcome to Face to Face, our most recent podcast. We're going to be talking about goodness and social change and how to make a difference and how to get people acting over just thinking about doing things that are good. Our guest today is Phil Haid, and he is the founder and CEO of Public. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell me a little bit about Public. What do you guys do? And let's provide a little bit of context here because nobody knows who the hell you are.
Yeah.
And go from there.
Great. So Public is, we like to say, sort of sits at the intersection of profit and purpose. We started the company 5 years ago, and we're really designed around trying to create social impact through this idea, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, around how do you merge profit and purpose. And what we essentially do is we create all kinds of what we like to think are innovative fundraising, advocacy, volunteer engagement campaigns and programs. And we have sort of two sides of the house. We have the consultancy agency side, where we literally, from coming up with the idea to, obviously creating the idea and putting it into the world, for companies and for charities. And we do all kinds with, brands that you'd recognize like WWF and Starbucks and RBC and Canadian Cancer Society and Heart and Stroke and so on. And then on the other side of our business, we're an incubator. So very purposefully, we see ourselves as, well, first of all, we're a social purpose business, but we see ourselves as change agents. And so we're interested in thinking about how do we move people to give more, do more good, but in a very different way than I think is the sort of traditional way of thinking about it, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So we have, on the incubator side of our business, we have a whole bunch of projects, some that are on a whiteboard, some that are actually in the world, where there's no client, there is just ideas where we are the authors of those ideas, and we put them out in the world to see if we can create social impact around them. So we have a crowdfunding platform called The Power of Two, which is about leveraging celebrities and their fans to raise money for the causes that they're most passionate about. We're working on a really exciting initiative with Dr. Mike Evans, who is well known for a video he created called 23 and a half hours, around getting people to walk 30 minutes a day. And we're actually creating the activation, the social business around that. We're working on a social good mortgage idea, and we're working on a whole mobile platform. So we have a bunch of our own ideas that are, there's no, as I say, no clients. They're things that we want to do and put in the world.
So who pays for all this stuff?
Well, at the moment, we pay for it, which is
because you're RBC, Starbucks.
Sure.
I get it. You've got corporate clients,
so
you've got a budget, and so on. But these ideas, these whiteboard ideas, which are fascinating to me, are initiatives that are, I guess, generated from within.
Right.
Your idea.
Yeah.
Somebody walks in, read an article the night before. Hey, we got to get involved in this.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where these whiteboard ideas come from?
To date, I'd say it's been mostly things that have been sort of stewing in mine and Paul, my co-founder and business partner, and Liam, the other partner's head, and increasingly our staff as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Who pays for them is the great question. At the moment, what we do is we essentially take the profit from the agency side of the business, and we've been paying for it. So Power of Two, this crowdfunding. So it's basically it's head-to-head kind of competition in a fun way. We built the platform, we paid for it, we continue to do it. And actually we have one coming out. We just finished one with two Major League Baseball players, one from the Yankees and one from the Red Sox. Our next one is actually around Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see who's the more giving city, Toronto or Vancouver.
Oh, okay.
All tied to Thanksgiving.
This is the Power of Two.
This is the Power of Two that's coming up.
When you guys launched that, I seem to remember Rick Campanelli.
Yeah, we did Rick Campanelli and Cheryl Hickey of ET.
Of ET, right.
And then we subsequently have done Emmanuel Shrieky, who was on a show called Entourage, against Lance Bass of the boy band NSYNC.
And basically it's who can raise more money than the other.
It's to see who can raise, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a fun head-to-head competition over 2 weeks' time, sort of 1 week off, 1 week.
Yeah.
And so, it's still in beta form, but we've raised over $100,000 to date on the platform. It's all through social media.
Yeah, it's neat.
But so we have paid for that. The development of this whole mortgage idea, we're paying for. We've got an amazing woman working with us who's an investment banker who is now working with us exclusively.
Wow.
On really vetting that idea. The 23 and a half hours, all of the time we've put into it is hours. We are actually in conversation with companies and the federal government to seed fund it. So we go look for seed funding, but we're big believers that you have to put sweat equity, and we want to get things going. So we use our own dollars to do it, prove it, put it in the world. As Mike Evans has taught me, we talk about it public, and I'd love to talk to you, David, about this in this podcast, but about failure. Right. And failing fast, and I'm a big proponent of it. Mike Evans talks about it as sucking less. So we're big believers. Get things in the world in a beta form, try them, they'll suck. Next time they're going to suck less. And so, but the idea is we get a little bit of traction, we learn, we think that there's actually, we test enough to believe that there's an idea here that could actually scale, and then we go seek funding from a variety of sources to go and try to build a business.
So that's Phil Haid from Public Inc. That's Public, publicinc.com. So, I've known you for a little while, Phil. I would call you a change maker. I've heard you called a change maker before. What's, social purpose? We've got the triple bottom line. What's motivating you to do this?
Yeah, it's
Are you going to be, rich beyond your wildest dreams one day, or what's...
Well, from your mouth to God's ears. It's interesting, and I say this to every person that we meet, and actually, particularly to staff when we're hiring people, is we are trying to create large-scale social impact in the world. And I'll talk to you about the philosophy behind that. And our belief is that if we do that in a way where you merge profit and purpose, yes, we'll make lots of money, but it is truly in that order. So I'm not driven by the money, I'm driven by the impact. And but as a change maker, the reason I started the company with Paul really was out of this feeling that the way in which we generally think about giving, in my mind, is it's vested in an old way of looking at the world. And what I mean by that specifically is that we're still caught in what I'd call a philanthropy model. Right? And in the philanthropy model, in the charity model, we ask people to give because it's the right thing to do. We ask people to give because it's a wonderful cause. We ask people to give because you can save lives and improve rivers and address social justice. And all of that is great.
And get a tax receipt.
Yeah. And that's a big driver of it.
It's a big drive for a lot.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but increasingly what we'd say is there's not all that much right about it either. And here's the argument. The problem with the charity philanthropy model in our minds is it doesn't scale. So you talk about you look out at the sector and you say 85,000 charities. If you include nonprofits, it's about 170,000 in this country, right? And it's 10 times that in the U.S. We work both in Canada and the U.S. So I like using a U.S. example. If you take all of the giving in the United States on an annual basis, right? It is roughly speaking about $400 billion, which sounds like an enormous amount of money until you put it into perspective, right? It costs, as an example, $500 billion to educate K to 12 across the United States for 1 year. So it's a drop in the ocean. And the problem that we have with the current model, and it's good in the sense that it's very pure, but it's the purity that's holding back the scale. And so right now, if you look at it, what do for-profits do? For-profit companies make their money on the one side and then they give back to community on the other, right? And the pocket of money that they have for community is on a relative basis to the money they make is tiny.
It's very tiny.
Right,
yeah.
It's tiny.
Usually.
Yeah, for the most part.
There's some really magnanimous philanthropists who are giving away millions.
Sure, on their own.
High percentages, like a Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett, exactly.
This kind of thing, but yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
And so, Target is held up, they give 5%. Right? And it's great, but it's still a tiny percentage. So they make their money on one side, and the philanthropic side is basically kept by and large separate. with cause marketing, you're starting to see a little bit of integration, but by and large, most cause marketing efforts to date are still philanthropy with marketing wrapped around them. So whether you buy that product or not, right, whether you take the action they want you to do, they're going to cut the check anyhow. Nonprofits, I would argue, charities do the exact same thing. They just do it in reverse. They do their core mission-based work on the one side of the ledger, and then they look for cash on the other, right? And they don't integrate. And individuals, I would argue, who aren't that civically engaged do the exact same thing. I go, I live my life, and then I give a little bit if my friend asks me because he or she is running in the walk, right? Sorry, running in the walk. Is running in the, X event that happens in June, July, August. So they're kept separate. And our whole notion, and we're not the only ones talking about this, it's Michael Porter's shared values thesis, is you need to merge profit and purpose. We need to start talking about how does everybody truly win in the equation? How do you actually drive more sales, right? More acquisition for a company? How do you drive their bottom line in a way that's going to create also a lot of social impact? How do charitable organizations raise money in a way that's core to mission, and how do you integrate giving into people's day-to-day life?
So to quote one of my favorite in italics writers, is the social responsibility of business to actually create good? Friedman said it's actually to create profit. Right. That's the bottom line. Yeah. There is only one bottom line. We're now talking about a triple line. People plan a profit. You can see some of it on your website as well. So do you think that has to, so why do I go to school, right? I go, I get a degree because I got to get a job and I got a family and so on. So we're talking about some pretty core values, I think, motivating factors and so on. Sounds like there's a few questions here, I think, Phil, but it sounds like we're, as far as the uphill climb that we've got, we're down pretty low on the ground.
We are, and I think what we're trying to advocate for, and we try to do it in our work, right, is move from what I'm talking about, that philanthropic charity model, to a what I'd call a social impact model. And so here's the fundamental difference. When your starting point is social impact, what is the impact that I want to create in society, right? Whether that is about getting less people living on the poverty line, whether that's about reducing your carbon footprint, whether that's about addressing a social wrong, whatever the issue is. If you start from the perspective of what is the impact that we want to create as an organization, right? If you start there, then it doesn't actually matter if you're a charity or a for-profit company or an individual, because you're thinking about the impact. So in our estimation, if when we're talking to companies, what we're actually saying is not getting into this debate, which is a rightful question you're asking about, is your bottom line about just making profit for your shareholders, or should you be a good corporate citizen? We're saying actually forget about that debate. The question is in this day and age, as a company, what kind of impact do you want to make in the world? And can you use social impact as a way both to differentiate yourself in the marketplace and drive your bottom line, right? Because in our minds, there are so many industries today, particularly on the for-profit side, where there's such a lack of differentiation. Everyone, you hate TELUS, Rogers and Bell. I mean, some people love them as well. But there's not a lot of differentiation between the three major telcos, right? There's not a lot of differentiation between what water you're going to buy if you're so inclined to buy bottled water instead of drinking the delicious tap water that we have. There's not a lot of differentiation in the mining industry. There's not a lot of differentiation in the consumer packaged goods, right? So what's going to differentiate in this day and age? And what most companies argue is that they actually try to play to, I'm going to get a discounting model, right? How am I going to get more people to buy my products and my services? What's my catchy way to get the attention so that they'll buy my product versus my competitor's product? And what we're continuing to advocate for is we believe that social impact, cause, can be a differentiator. So that if you can start to figure out what, as a good corporate citizen, what you actually want to impact in the world, then what we want to do is help figure out how we can also do it in a way that drives your bottom line, because you'll do more of it, not less of it.
Sure. Do you think cause at this point in this day and age is really an add-on. It's a footnote if you're lucky. It's not a part of a corporation strategy at this point. I mean, some of them maybe are starting to think that way. We're seeing CSR being talked about a lot more. But there's this whole idea of greenwashing as well. Like, well, everyone else is doing it, so we better do something that's cause-related.
You know what, I would say I actually think it is part of their strategies to date. I think that being a good corporate citizen, giving back to the community is table stakes. You have to do it now. I think what's interesting is we're seeing a lot more movement on the sustainability front. So there's a lot, you look at what Walmart has done on greening its entire enterprise. The fact that they're the largest seller of organic foods today. I mean, it's wild, right?
It is wild. And when you think of the implications of taking out one fluorescent light bulb every other fixture, when they do that across the world, what the
impact is significant.
Huge.
So here's what's interesting. So I do think it is absolutely part of the strategy. What I think is interesting is on the sustainability side, I think companies are, they're there and they're doing more and more and more, and they have a long way to go, but they're actually moving in the right direction. What's interesting though is they haven't the light bulb hasn't gone on as it relates to the community side, which is why wouldn't you also think about your impact in community beyond your environmental impact, but think about your social impact, and why wouldn't you tie that to your bottom line? So what Walmart does from an environmental standpoint actually does drive their bottom line. Hotel industry a number of years ago, moved to this, hey, if you want to reuse your towel, leave it. Well, they saved a ton of money doing it, but that's, in our minds, that's actually a good thing. So what we're saying is, why wouldn't you apply the exact same thinking and discipline to, as it relates to the social side, and say, rather than thinking about this as philanthropy, rather than just deciding how much of a check you want to write each year, rather than doing that, build the social impact that you want to create in the world right into your core offering. Because if you do that and you can make money off it, you'll do more of it, not less.
Have you read a lot of Marx?
You know what? I did an undergrad in political theory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess, kind of a joke, I suppose. But at the same time, there's something here about the whole Friedman-esque-like approach. This, social responsibility is to increase profits. You're talking about community. You're talking about cause. You're talking about, to me, not philanthropy, but a certain type of generosity or a certain type of sharing that is the antithesis of self-interest, which seems to be the foundation of the corporate model, the model in the West, capitalism. Maybe are you maybe saying that's not necessarily the case?
No, I'm actually arguing that
let's redefine self-interest.
Yeah, exactly. What we are trying to propose is, when we say why shouldn't everyone profit by doing good, right? The first question you see on our website is we strongly believe that if we do not drive individual, a companies, a charities, a nonprofits, individuals' self-interest, we'll never go to scale. So we have to play into people's behaviors. We have to play into market force. And what we're saying is there is nothing wrong with being self-interested, but what we are saying is you need to align that with social impact.
Right.
And so what we do to date is we say it's unpure, right? It's untoward, it's dirty if I profit from my philanthropy. And the reason for that is that the hangover is that philanthropy is supposed to be pure. This is about the love of humankind. It's about charity, is about giving back. And what we're saying is that's all well and good, but it doesn't actually add up. It doesn't scale to the level we need to solve the problems in society. So if we're really serious about solving problems from a local community level all the way up to an international level, then we need to move away from philanthropy and we need to move to social impact. And the only way you can have social impact is if you actually drive people's bottom lines, which means their own self-interest, which is what profit's about.
Is there something here, I'm sure there is a connection between this whole idea. I haven't really asked you the question of, the nonprofits. I know you've worked with quite a few nonprofits over the years and so on, but, donor fatigue, compassion fatigue. Well, I did give at the office, that cliche. Or, the Dollar Children's Wish Foundation on the way out of the Walmart checkout, and no thanks. What, you can't, I personally, and I'm not boasting, I always give if I believe in the organization. For me, it's a reminder. It's a buck.
Right.
It's a buck. It's a reminder to me that I'm in a bit more of a privileged position than most, and so I'm going to at least, plus we obviously give back as a family, etc.
Of course.
I'm always a little annoyed when I hear those three people in front of me or behind me say no.
Right.
I'm like, come on there, big guy. It's $1.
Right, but here's the thing. I mean? I'm glad you raised that because we actually have a whole thesis around the at cash moment. In fact, have tested
the at cash moment.
Yeah, we call it the at cash moment.
Hysterical.
And in fact, first you get the first hot off the presses on your podcast. We are going to be doing this fall a reverse RFP around it. So let me explain that in 2 seconds. Here's the thing about that moment. It is a great time to ask people for money because your wallet is out, right? But in our thesis, this whole notion of profit and purpose and driving the self-interest of people in order to create greater social impact and scale, the way in which that at cash, would you like to add $1 to your bill, is conceived today is all wrong. And here's what's wrong about it. It's wrong from a business standpoint and it's wrong from a human behavior standpoint. So let me tackle both. From a business standpoint, asking people to give $1 of cash does nothing to get people into your store. It does nothing to increase the size of your purchase, and it does nothing to actually improve, in most cases, I would argue, the morale of your employees, because the people at the cash who are asking are being rejected all day long, right? Even though they raise a lot of money.
Well, I got into a chat with somebody at the liquor store recently, and she said, well, yeah, it's only for a couple more days.
Exactly.
Tired of asking.
Well, sure, you ask all day long. Exactly. Yeah. And your customer's last taste in their mouth when they leave your store, by and large, is actually a bad one.
It's good,
right? And in most cases, because you're the exception, not the rule, because you're highly civically engaged in the work that you do in the world, is people don't even remember who the charity was when they left.
It's
right.
Truth. Yeah.
So that's, from a business standpoint, does nothing to drive my business. So it's actually just a cost, and it's about me looking like a good good citizen, but it's actually having a negative impact on my business. Now, so from where we sit, we think, well, that's problematic. So now, think about it, and let's flip it in terms of thinking about it from a social impact standpoint. If the company said, we care deeply about hunger, right? And we recognize that hunger is an extremely complex issue, but if we're raising $2 million from our at cash program, what if we could make that 10 million? What could we do with $10 million on the issue of hunger? Because that's the interesting conversation to have. So then, how are you going to make the at cash program increase? And so our whole hypothesis around this is, and we did test it with Winners and HomeSense, is you have to take the burden off the person, the sales associate, right, who's asking all day long. And the human behavior that's being driven with the current at cash programs is, I'm going to ask you like to give, and in most cases the person will say yes because they don't want to feel like a heel for saying no, right? You feel guilty. Because how can I say no to kids with autism when I'm sitting at Toys R Us and I've just bought my kid a $50 piece of Lego?
This is what always blows me away, is the juxtaposition of it. The guilt, you would think at least, would increase the at cash sales,
right?
As you call them, just because I just dropped $50 on a piece of crummy plastic,
right?
And I can't afford $1 for kids with autism.
Exactly.
Exactly. How do you reconcile with that?
This is it. So what's happened on at cash programs is when they were new and novel, right? They worked like gangbusters. Right. But when I go to the toy store, the liquor store, the food store, and at every single place I'm being asked, all of a sudden I have license to say no, right? And now I start to get a little resentful that I'm being asked all the time. And you know what? I give through the United Way campaign, and I give to my friends who are in the walk, and I give, if I'm very proactive, I sit down with my family and figure out where I'm going to give this year. Mm-hmm. So how dare you ask me, right? That's the mindset a lot of people have, right? And so behaviorally what we're doing is we're saying to people, you should give because you don't want to look like a heel, right? And you feel guilty, which is the wrong behavior to tread. So what we're trying to do with flipping the model is to say, no, you gotta shift it. What's in it for me? Right? How do I actually get behaviorally the person waiting in line to ask the sales associate, what's this promotion all about? And how can I win that thing? Or how can I get that opportunity? So we once pitched Walmart this idea where we said, imagine if you come up, you're at Walmart, and you come up to the cash, and above the cash register, where the sales associate is a big banner, right? And I've already been primed because I've read it in a flyer. I've been introduced by the greeter at the store. I've seen some promotion around it, and I see it in the aisles as well on the end cap. And I come to the sale to ready to pay, and it says, something better than I'm going to write, but it says, help a child in need, and you can get your kid in the box. right? And the promotion is, if you contribute to this program, not only will you have a chance to win all kinds of discounts on your next purchase, which you get a perforated on your pin up that you put up, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And you basically get it and you can bring it back into store. So here's the business benefit and find out next in store. But you can win a chance to get your child written into the next Xbox game. Right? So I create an experience I couldn't otherwise buy. There's real value exchange, plus I can win discounts on my purchases, which I have to do by going online and then also coming back into the store to see if I can validate and win, right? So from a business perspective, if I can take the pressure off the sales associate, if I can get people back into my store, and if I can also create promotions where I can get them buying more things, but attached to that is actually also money going to the issue, right? It's a win all the way around.
Yeah.
But we don't behave that way because we're supposed to keep this stuff pure.
Right.
And so this is part of the problem. You mentioned about donor fatigue. Is part of the problem that we have, that we observe at least in the sector, is there's a lack of risk taking. And as a result of a lack of risk taking, we see the same old programs over and over and over again.
Don't want to upset my donor base.
Right.
Right. They're a 50 to 62-year-old demographic. We can't try something like that. That's way too young.
Exactly.
They don't have email, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I've given a presentation at this AFP conference, and I did it in Chicago at the Cause Marketing Forum, and it's called The Race to be Third. Why basically charities and nonprofits want to be third. And it's because I have been in way too many meetings where we're pitching a new idea. And you can see the excitement on the face of the people in the room. And then the inevitable question comes up. So have you done this before? And the first time I got asked that question...
What's the ROI? Is that another... Do you get that?
Well, I get that question as well. And that's a fair question,
yeah.
Right? But have you ever done this before is usually the first question. And naively, when we started Public, I remember the first time I did this, obviously I won't name names, but I'm in a room and I'm pitching this idea and I'm all excited. And the person asked me, so have you done this before? When have you done this? And I naively said, no, we haven't. You'll be the first. Isn't that great? And you could literally, it was like that, wah, 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 and all the air got sucked out of the room. And so there's a complete fear of trying things. Why? Because if they don't work, that's seen as failure.
Yeah.
So my hobby horse, and I talk a lot about it, is one of the biggest problems about why I think it's not the sole focus of it, but one of the big reasons for the fatigue in the sector around giving is because there's a lack of creativity and innovation about how we engage people in giving, partly tied to the fact that it's not reciprocal, and partly tied to the fact that we're doing the same old. Right? And so we're afraid to fail. And in our world, where we sit at Public, we embrace failure. Right? You think about it. Science is based on failure. Mm-hmm. Scientific inquiry is all about...
Well, failure and discovery, and you can't discover without taking risks and chances and so on. So it's a kind of a no-brainer.
You have to, right? You have a hypothesis, you try something, it doesn't work. So that's science. Then you look at venture capital, right? You think about the whole world of venture capital. It's based on failure. So why is it that in the social space, right, in the social enterprise space, where people are doing incredible things to improve people's lives, we're so afraid to fail?
Do you think that is just the social enterprise space? I think that might have something to do with being human to some degree. At the risk of sounding like I'm absolving the world of responsibility,
right.
It does sound like, for me, it's about choice. It's freedom. This is about you. This is intentionality. Choose to do this, follow through, and then make sense of it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering though, if there's maybe a little more cynical, that there's this. I like things the way they are.
There's no question.
There's a status quo. I'm satisfied with mediocrity because it pays the bills.
Yeah.
And my kids are provided for, and I have a decent life.
Yeah.
I've got Netflix, and
there's no question. There's no question that there's a human element of human behavior here, which says, right, that I'm not, and look at different profiles, different personas of people, and that's what you're saying is bang on. But I also think culturally, there are certain sectors and certain industries where the culture of failure has been more embraced, right? So in Silicon Valley, you wear it,
that language.
You wear it with a badge of honor,
right?
I think you wouldn't find one scientist who wouldn't be suspicious if you said, I had this idea and I tested it and it worked on the first try. No one would believe you, right? But we're expecting the same, but yet in the sort of social impact cause sector, people are failing every single day. We're just not talking about it.
Yeah, that's
and,
right.
and what we're suggesting is we need to flip it again and say embrace it, because failure isn't failure. Failure is testing ideas to improve them to make it better the next time.
We just, SoChange just finished writing a report to the Ontario Trillium Foundation of a pretty cool campaign we've been working on, malaria-related, mosquitoes suck, fun, and so on. And as we were writing it, and I didn't do a final edit, but I did a read-through before I said, go ahead and submit. I've been working in this field for a while. There was, on those indicators that we didn't meet, there was this, oh man, how can we make that sound better?
Totally.
I didn't want to admit
for
that
sure.
we blew it. We made the wrong decision there, and we should have hired this person instead, or we should have spent more money doing this.
Right.
And you've got this breakdown, and the reality is, though, I think and I hope the donors are feeling the same way as well, because I think there is a fear, actually, a deep-seated fear in the nonprofit sector when it comes to certainly bilateral donors. It's almost like I'm going to just write in whatever we wrote in the first place, because that's what they want to hear.
Exactly.
They don't want to hear that actually we could do this better next year, so please give us some more money, which might not be a bad idea because we're actually going to grow and we're going to have better. You know what I mean? And so it's like this. It's this circular nightmare. It's what it is.
It's a cultural structure in place that forced you in that moment. It's a human behavior as well.
By the way, we didn't flub the numbers.
Yeah.
It's a very legitimate report. Right. We're very proud of it. But at the same time, I'm just it's a good indicator, I think, of how deep that goes.
Absolutely. And imagine if instead of having to have that question go off in your head, you were being encouraged to actually share all of the failure, right? The things that did not work, including the things that worked. I used to be on the Laidlaw Foundation board.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And when I was chair of it, I was arguing a lot for this exact notion that said, why, we keep talking about partnering with our grantees. And I said, but the reality is, there's a power dynamic that you're never going to escape. Right? Because if you've got the money and the other person wants your money and they want to try to get more of it, it's exactly what you've just said. But if we flipped it and said, look, we as a foundation are trying to create this impact in the world, and we know that the road to get there is going to be, is going to have all kinds of challenges and all kinds of failure, and that's actually good because we're going to learn from it. We want to be a partner with you because we believe that giving you this money with what you're trying to do will actually get us there. Then actually you set up a very different dynamic that says, let's figure out what worked and absolutely more importantly what didn't work, right? But that's not the way it's constructed in philanthropy, particularly tied to foundations and money. So this is rife throughout the whole sector, and no one wants to talk about what doesn't work. I have to give kudos to Engineers Without Borders, right? Because they had the failure report. Yeah. We have worked with them, and we actually had an idea for them called Fund to Failure. Right. And I actually wrote a blog for the Huffington Post called "Are You Ready to Fund a Failure?" exactly on the thing we're talking about right now, which was all about failure does not equal failure. And as a sector, we have to change that, because part of this comes full circle to your question on donor fatigue. Part of it is because of the lack of creativity and innovation in the way in which we're engaging donors in giving, right? And part of it, I think, is because it's not reciprocal enough. But how can we be more innovative if we're not willing to take risks? Right? If we're not willing to try things. How many nonprofits do you know, or charities do you know, that have an innovation budget where they're willing to try stuff and fail? Right? 5%. 10% would be amazing, but 5% of their total overall budget to innovation. Right? We do it at Public. Projects is all that.
That's the takeaway alone. If you're not engaged by now, then shut off your radio. But that's the takeaway right there. There's tons here, but just that alone is incredibly good advice. Start incremental, right?
Incremental,
put a little
absolutely.
bit of money towards it this year. See what you can do. It's a fantastic idea.
It's good throwaway money, right? If it hits, fantastic.
Yeah.
But if we're afraid to try, if we're afraid to do new things, how can the sector as a whole, when we think about cause and social issues and social impact, more importantly, how can we move the dial on an incremental, not an incremental basis, but on a real lockstep change? We so many times we'll go on the consulting agency side and we'll talk to a nonprofit, and we work with many of them, and we'll say, when we're defining success around fundraising as an example, and we'll say, well, what would 10 times look like? They cannot have the conversation about what 10 times look like. They just won't have it. It's not possible. Well, we'll say, what do you mean it's not possible?
Right,
it's
right.
not possible to think what 10 times our revenue would look like. And our first question always is, why not?
Mm-hmm.
We're not suggesting you're going to get there tomorrow, but isn't the goal to create greater social impact?
Mm-hmm.
And aren't you saying you need more money to do that? So why aren't we thinking about that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's part, there's all kinds of things swirling around that contribute to this. The composition of boards, the so-called, we're going to bring business acumen to the boards. And yet those people who come from the business sector sit on boards, they actually don't behave the way they would in their day-to-day job, and they take a complete risk-averse approach and a very, very conservative approach, and it does a disservice, right? And I'm being a bit categorical to make these points, but there's all kinds of things swirling. And so, you asked about being a social change agent. What we're trying to do at Public at the end of the day is really disrupt the whole model of giving and good and say we've got to move to a new model.
So what if we don't disrupt it? What if your experiment here, it's more than an experiment, doesn't work ultimately in 20 or 30 or 40 years? Are we in deep trouble? As globally, are we in deep trouble?
No, because something else will emerge. But you know what? I'm actually not worried about that because it is working. Because you know what? Look at what's happening in the world today. I mean, look at across the board. There's all kinds of interesting disruptions. Crowdfunding, in my mind, is an incredible disruption. That is. I'm blown away by some of the things that happen in crowdfunding daily. You look at what's happening on a crowdsourced version of that with groups like Avaz on the advocacy front. They're changing the game on advocacy, right? They're changing the relationship people have on it. And maybe I'm overstating it. But then you look at all kinds of things that people are doing around the integration of profit and purpose. The rise of social enterprise. I forget the name of the company or the organization that has this ball that you can play with and it generates energy, right? That can then, light up lamps, right?
Right.
I mean, there's so many. And then I look at what like a Procter & Gamble is doing around water now. And of course, what Unilever has done globally. I mean, we're moving in this direction, right? You've got guys like Richard Branson, who I think are incredible. He's still talking more about philanthropy, I would say.
Right.
But even then, he's doing social enterprise. So it's a great question. I'm not worried about it because I think there's just so many indicators out there of people doing incredible things. The world is moving in that direction.
I think you're right. I sometimes, though, do despair a little bit when, it kind of goes back to that comment, that crack I made earlier about what do you mean you can't afford $1 when you just spent $50 on a transformer?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't there's this huge gap there? And I struggle with this idea of self-interest because ultimately I suppose we could redact or reduce every act to some sort of selfish or self-interested act. Well, it's about my family or it's about my job or whatever the case might be. But what about the concern for the other? Where is the concern for the other, embedded in this idea of cause marketing or social change or
profit and purpose or cause and commerce.
Exactly. It's about the triple bottom line. No, hang on. It's about doing the right thing.
Right.
So
it's a great question, and I should have actually posed this as a bit of a caveat off the top, which is, at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is engage more people in giving and doing good, right? The name of the company is called Public for a reason, which is we're trying to engage large swaths of people and make better citizens, essentially. When you're highly civically engaged, the drivers for you in terms of the reciprocity are different. But I think what happens today is, and it bears out when you look at Imagine Canada and its data on their whole giving and volunteering survey, where on the giving side, it's the 20% that give 80%, right? So what we're really talking about is how do you get people that aren't that civically engaged in the tent? How do you broaden the base? Because ultimately, if we're talking about better citizenship, we're talking about people contributing to community, right?
Absolutely, and I think you're talking about how do you get people to care.
Absolutely.
Outside of their own backyard or out of their own circle of influence.
Right. What we do today in the philanthropic charity model is we presume you should care because you just should.
Right.
And what we're saying at Public is that doesn't cut it for more than 20% of the population.
Right.
So if we're interested in trying to grow the pie, we cannot say you should care just because. It's like if you tell your kids ask you a question and you give them the answer because, it's not good enough. So what we're saying is we need to be able to start to say you should give, right? Because there's something in it for you. And what's in it for you doesn't always mean a discount. Right. Or money in your pocket. Right. I mean, we're talking about profit.
Or an iPhone 5.
Right. We're talking about profit in the broadest sense of the word.
Yeah.
But it is reciprocity. And when I strongly believe that the best relationships in life, the best transactions are about reciprocity. So I always joke, I say, when and this is changing, but when nonprofits go and they approach corporate, right? They generally do the same thing, which is they go and they say, we've got this great initiative and you should get behind it and it's going to make you look like a great corporate citizen and your employees are going to love it, right? And those things may or may not be true. But if you really think about it, they're thinking, sitting there going, but wait a minute, I've got to drive my bottom line, I've got all these different deliverables on my plate, how is that going to solve it, right? And I say back to the nonprofit, if you can't demonstrate reciprocal value, why would they do it, right? I say, and then I explain, show me a relationship where it's all one way, right? If I said, David, I call you up weekly and all I do is I ask for things, right? And I'm never thinking about how I can give back to you. I'm never thinking about what the reciprocal relationship is like. Well, how strong a relationship is that going to be? Yes, right? And so what we're really talking about here in Profit and Purpose is about reciprocity. And the exchange of value. And the exchange of value is not only about money, but that, in my mind, is how you play to human behavior. And when you play to human behavior, that's how you can scale and create social impact.
Like you're also trying to redefine value itself in a way, because I think too often, like you say, when we talk about this reciprocity and self-interest, it's quantified in a financially tangible way. I get a free admission to this. I get free popcorn. I buy Cheerios because I get access to Cineplex Odeon theaters.
Right.
And there's always some kind of financial benefit. But I think, at the risk of sounding a little trite, Mother Teresa tried, I think, to change the way poverty was looked at. It's social poverty. It's emotional poverty. It's spiritual poverty. It's not just a financial distinction. Right. And one of the things I've been struggling with is I want to start talking about not about poverty anymore. I want to talk about folks that are vulnerable. I want to talk about people that are at risk, because I believe you and I both have been vulnerable and at risk at some point in our life.
Sure.
Maybe not financially.
Yeah.
Maybe we both come from incredibly privileged backgrounds, but often the case is when it comes to things like social and human capital and so on, we might ultimately be bankrupt. So right. How do we start changing the way people think about that? I mean, I think we've answered that question today, frankly. But I think that's what you guys are trying to do here, which is huge.
Absolutely,
huge task.
And it is. And look, proud of what we've done to date. Lots of failure as well. Yeah. And we're very activation focused. So we're not about creating awareness. We're about getting people to take action.
Right.
And fundamental to that is asking the question: if I'm trying to get this audience to do something that has a net social impact, right? We ask all kinds of questions, but there are two really important ones. One, what's in it for me being that audience, and two, why would I? And it's related, but why would I do it, right? And to your point, it's not just about getting a chance of winning the iPod or getting tickets to X. That's a piece of it, but the answer is because actually it makes me laugh and I want to share that. Right? Or it plays to my strong sense of social justice. So some of the time we answer the question, why would I do it? Because we believe against that audience, it actually plays right core to their values. And it's about actually allowing them to express those values, right, in a way where they can be recognized. So don't underestimate the power of recognition as well. So we're trying to think about it across the board, right? But we really have to move to that, that differentiating model. And the current model, last thing I'll say about it is that we get stuck in the charity and sort of philanthropy model. We get stuck on things like ratios, right? So we say, well, I want to make sure that if I'm giving to a charity that it's 90-10, right? Or 85-15 or 80-20.
As if doing good shouldn't cost money.
Right.
How absurd is that?
It's completely absurd, and it totally misses the point, which is if you care about social impact, right, your ratio is not important, right? I mean, if 40 cents on the dollar is going to do the thing and 60, right? I mean, there is appropriate levels. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But when you think about social impact versus philanthropy, and you're thinking about what's going to change in the world, why do you care? Let's take the gross extremes. Take a charity that has a 60-40 split, so 60 to mission, 40 to overhead, and then take a charity that has 90% to mission and 10% to overhead. But if the charity is at 60-40 is having huge impact in the world, and the other one is having mediocre which one do you want to give to? I know where I want to give.
Yeah, well, you got to be talking about efficacy at that point, right?
This is it.
I think, well, it's absolutely. It's as if philanthropy is a stepping stone to social impact, right? That's what it sounds like to me. It's just one piece of the puzzle. It's not the end.
Right.
It's the, yeah. No,
And when there's a hangover. So that's, I mean, we've had a really interesting conversation, but we're playing in so many different ways to really challenge the way we think about doing good and giving, right? And we are trying to disrupt it and thinking about it in a very, very, I think, different way that is driven by human behavior. That and it really, our belief is that if us and many, many, many more people like us continue to push this, I think we're going to see a complete evolution in the way.
Agreed. There's reasons to be hopeful. Right off of their website, quote, "We need to unlock the power of good inside everyday actions and behaviors in our daily purchases and routines so it actually becomes extraordinary, not to make it part of everything we do," close quote. That's Public. That's Phil Hay joining us. Philip.
Feels good.
For family members only. Thanks so much for joining us today. Publicinc.com, Public. I almost added a K, inc.com. Anything in one last word you want to say about what's next for you guys? Like, you got to, we've got this, the reversal of the AdCap
the
which is
reversal.
coming, so we should be looking for that.
Yeah, we have, we have
check
all
out
kinds.
your website.
Check it out. We have all kinds of, and check us out through social. We have all kinds of campaigns coming. A really interesting, I'll highlight one. We have a really interesting campaign coming out with the Anglican Church of Canada, tied to their work on food security internationally that I'm very excited about and proud about. We're doing all kinds of stuff.
Cool. Check it out, publicinc.com. Thanks so much, Phil, for joining us
Thank
today.
you. I appreciate it.